How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. This is the fourth drum lesson in my series, Drumming Without Drums. Now, if you remember, last lesson we learned how to play a basic rock beat on our snare drum over here and our hi-hat. And we also played the floor for our bass drum. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work on mixing up the bass drum so that we're going to be playing the bass drum on more than just 1 and 3. Okay, so just for a quick review, I'm going to play the basic rock beat that we learned, and remember, I'm going to count out loud. You always want to count either eighth notes or quarter notes. Okay, I'm going to stick with counting eighth notes, which we count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so I'm going to pick a pretty slow tempo or speed, and then I'm going to play my right hand on every eighth note, my left hand on 2 and 4, and my foot on 1 and 3. Okay? I'll start with just my right hand. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1. Alright? So that was the basic rock beat that we learned. Now we're not going to be changing much, okay? And as I said, we're just going to be working with putting the bass drum on different notes, okay? So I want you to pay attention. When we count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, we're actually counting 8 different eighth notes, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, okay? So we have 8 places where we can play the bass drum, or 8 different eighth notes where we can play the bass drum, okay? Now we're only playing on 1 and 3. We're only playing 2 of those 8 eighth notes, okay? So that's kind of important to understand. So we're going to work on learning a few beats here where the bass drum is doing different things, okay? The first thing you want to do, though, is just, it's a little variation on the basic rock beat, okay? And it's something called 4 on the floor, okay? So when someone tells you to play a 4 on the floor beat, you're going to know from now on what to do. 4 on the floor means you're just lining up your bass drum on every quarter note. Now remember, quarter notes are just 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 of those, right? So 4 on the floor means playing your bass drum on every 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? It's a little bit more difficult than just playing the bass drum on 1 and 3, because on 2 and 4, as you already know, we're already playing our snare drum and our hi-hat. So that's kind of tricky in drums, actually, because you want everything to line up perfectly. And again, counting really helps this, okay? So let me just demonstrate this, and I'll talk about ways for you to learn this rather easily, okay? So again, I'm going to start with just my hi-hat. When I'm comfortable, I'll add my snare, and then I'll start playing the bass drum on 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and now add the snare. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Now the bass. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1. Now, I'm not going to try to act like this is super easy, okay? I know if you're watching this, you're probably a beginner drummer, okay? But the way to learn these beats, remember, is to break it down. Break it down means isolating each of the different parts, okay? So, the first thing you want to do, because remember, counting is another element that you have to add to your limbs playing. So you want to just start counting, because you always want to count, and you want to play your bass drum, right? So if you're having trouble coordinating this whole beat, put the sticks down and count. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and when you just get comfortable with those two things going, you're counting your bass drum, you can pick another element of the beat to add. So let's pick the snare drum. So here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And when you're comfortable with that, add your right hand on the hi-hat. And 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you could always do it different ways, right? So you could start with maybe just a hi-hat, right? Count along, obviously always count. And then you could just play the hi-hat and bass drum. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Or you could even just practice without, well actually with counting, just playing 2 and 4 with your right hand, your left hand, and your bass drum to practice lining everything up. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So get creative with it. I'm not going to go through every different way you can practice this beat, but I'm just demonstrating the technique you would use, okay? To really just strip it down and play one element, play 2 elements, and then try to add everything, okay? Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the bass drum off of 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to start playing it on different 8th note combinations. Okay, so this is important. Remember, every time I count and, that's still a note. Okay, that's still another 8th note. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to work on putting the bass drum on 1 and then 3 and. Okay, so that's 4 different bass drum notes in each measure. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate this just with my bass drum so you can hear it. Then I'll add in the different parts, okay, the hands. So here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And when you're comfortable with that, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and you're going to add your hi-hat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then when you're comfortable with that, add the snare. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1. Okay? So I'm not going to again go through every combination that you can do with your bass drum. I will go through one more, however. Okay? You have 8 different 8th notes which you can play on your bass drum. Okay, so you might want to do steady 8th notes on the bass drum, right? So basically you're playing the same thing on your bass drum that you are with your right hand. So it would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay, that's one thing you can do. And now that I think of it, it's actually pretty challenging to put the bass drum only on every and, okay? So it's not right on the quarter notes, it's on those, what we call the upbeats. The ands are called the upbeats, okay? That's a little bit more than you need to know. But that's pretty challenging. So what you want to do again is just break it down. Maybe start with the hi-hat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And remember, we're playing the bass drum on every and. So you might want to even play it slower. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now you see, you really have to count. If you're not counting, you're not going to get much out of my lessons, okay? So if you're afraid to count out loud, then just forget about it, okay? You need to count out loud. That's going to help everything line up. It's going to help you understand the notes that you're playing, and it's going to help you not get lost, okay? Because eventually when we're going to be playing music, you need to know where you are in the music, all right? So that's pretty much what I want to say. And even though I'm not going over tons of material so far, remember, there's a lot of different ways you can practice. You can start really slow, so when you get comfortable with the basic beats I'm showing you, you can try speeding it up. But the name of the game is when you speed it up, just stop completely and then start counting faster, rather than starting slow and then deciding to speed it up as you're playing, okay? That's a little dangerous because you don't want to get in the habit of speeding or rushing, as we say in music, or dragging or slowing down. Okay? Keep the tempo or the pace you're playing super steady. Okay? So you can practice going slow or fast, and you can also, let me see here. I was going to say another way that you can practice is remember to practice counting eighth notes and quarter notes. All right? So if you think you have the beat solid counting eighth notes, then try it again, just counting quarters. So you'd play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And counting quarters allows you to go a little bit faster. Okay? So there's still a lot of things that you can practice, even though we've only gone over, a couple different beats. All right? So this is really the foundation of what you need to know to be a good drummer. So really stick with it. I'll try to put up the next lesson pretty soon. But thanks for tuning in again.